Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, episode 287, Widows Unfiltered, an interview with Amy Krill.
Welcome to the Widowed Mom Podcast, the only podcast that offers a proven process to help you work through your grief, to grow, evolve, and create a future you can truly look forward to. Here's your host, Master Certified Life Coach, Grief Expert, Widow, and Mom, Krista St-Germain.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I've got a good interview for you. You're going to love Amy. She is, and I said this in our interview, but she's one of the most open-hearted people that I know. She is just a genuinely kind, loving human, and I think you're going to resonate with her story. So with that, enjoy my interview with Amy Krill. I'm so glad to have you, Amy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Krista.
Yeah. So I'm going to have you just tell listeners a little bit about who you are. What brought you here?
Well, I'm Amy, and 4 years ago, my husband passed away unexpectedly, and he passed away in a way that was pretty traumatic for us.
Yeah.
And I very quickly fell into, the stir of grief, the flurry of so much going on around you, whether it be your feelings or the to-dos or what have you, and just became overwhelmed very quickly with life.
Yeah. Did you listen to the podcast first? I don't even remember it. When you said 4 years, I'm like, wow, is it really 4 years?
Yeah, it's over 4 years. So it was 4.5 years ago, almost 4.5 years ago. And, I had a career for many, many years and was quite, involved in my career and my company. And my husband and Jason and I had been talking about me moving out of that line of work and starting my own life coaching business. And so at the time, I had just signed up to go to Brooke Castillo's life school. And when he died, I knew very quickly that I needed help. And so I went back to Brooke's podcast, started listening to it, and immediately knew that that wasn't what I needed. And so I started looking for life coaches who, this is within like 2 weeks of his passing.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Started looking for life coaches who were widows. And I found one and I listened to, and she was great, but I knew she wasn't quite right for me. And then I found you secondarily and started listening to your podcast. And right away, you were so relatable. Your language that you used, your experience, everything was just so relatable for me. And so I just ate it up. I listened, like so many other women who've joined your program, I listened to all your podcasts, like binged them. That's the word I'm looking for. I binged them over and over and over again until I was all the way through. And then eventually reached out to you to talk to you about joining the program. I just knew that I needed something. I was very committed to living an intentional life prior to Jason passing away and had been for years. And not that I wanted to fix what was wrong, but I knew I wanted to process everything and figure out, as you say, figure out how to create a life I can love. Even though I had just lost my partner in crime.
Yeah. It's not super common that 2 weeks after losing their person that people are like, life coaching, that's what I need. So you must have had a pretty solid, experience of it before or knowledge of it before. If you be one.
I hadn't worked with a life coach, but I was, in my line of work, I coached people all the time. And I had also done a series of group life coaching programs in my barn for fun and for free. So it was kind of my thing, right? It was something I believed in. So I did have a therapist for a while after Jason passed. I would say the first 6 months, and she was great. She helped me mostly with, some things around like dynamics that I was dealing with family and also like just the emotions that were running through my body, like that initial craziness that you feel. But I knew I needed something different than that. And so that was, I was listening on the sidelines.
Yeah. Yeah. So when Jason died, not that you have to tell us all of your grief experiences, but how did what you experienced after he died compared to grief that you had experienced in the past?
Wow. Okay. So that's not something I've thought about. I had a few years before Jason died, my best friend Bobby died. And that was very sudden and unexpected. And I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I remember being so shocked at how it affected me emotionally. Like it took me down in a way
when
that
Bobby
I wasn't.
died?
It shattered me. And when Jason died, yes, I was heartbroken and all those feelings, but like I realized that everything was going to be okay. Like I knew that. I had this inner knowing. And maybe, like I've said before, that I've almost felt like, I feel like gifts come out of difficult times. And I felt like Bobby's departure and death sort of provided me with a knowing when my own husband passed that I would be okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not sure I know how to explain that. I also had Bobby like connect with me spiritually after his passing, and he still does. And so I knew I had a knowing also then that would come with Jason. It took a long time for me to feel it in the way I felt it. But yeah.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating how different it is for everyone, right? Some people absolutely, thought that they experienced an intense grief before and then have never experienced anything like this. Some people feel, like prior experiences prepared them for experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm always
the shock of losing your partner and the impact it has on you physically, emotionally, all of that, I could never have been prepared for. So, the physical toll that Jason's departure took on me was incredible and surprising. And that is, when I started working with you, that was one of the things that started to shift for me in such a big way. Was even though I thought I was dealing so well, there were things that were locked up inside of me that were causing me, I guess I would say, illness or disease internally, because there was such physical pain and brain fog and all of those kinds of things. So I didn't have that with Bobby. He didn't live with me. He wasn't in my every moment of every day.
Yeah.
Still every morning when I grind coffee, what do I think of? Jason. That's every single morning.
Yeah.
So that's different.
Yeah. And also, I don't know, the circumstances around different people's deaths in our lives are different too. And so I do think for me, for sure, even though I had lost people close to me before Hugo, the way in which Hugo died and the trauma around that was also for me a whole nother level of support that I needed, that I really hadn't had anything in my life match that.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, the trauma part of it.
Yeah. And also just being a parent, right? And like, when you lose a friend and you've got your partner's support to help you process it, or to at least maybe handle the parenting part while you're, coming out of that.
Right.
But then to not have that and to have to be the parent, even if your kids are older, right? I think there is this just like survival mode that sometimes kicks in.
Oh, big time.
Because what other choice is there?
There is no other choice.
Yeah.
You have to survive.
Yeah.
There is another choice.
Right. But yeah.
Right. But right.
Yes. Always good to remind ourselves we are actually choosing, and we can be proud of ourselves for that. Yeah.
Yes. I learned that from you.
Well,
for sure.
That's because I'm always like pushing it back to people. Somebody told me this. Yeah. She was like, you need to be able to take a compliment. I'm like, it's not that I don't want to take a compliment. It's that I want to keep reminding people of how powerful they are,
Totally.
Because I think that matters so much. So you said that you were noticing that there were physical impacts of what was going on in your grief. What helped you connect the dots to figure that out? What was most supportive for you to deal with that and support yourself? Like, what worked for you? And this is not advertisement for coaching, right? Like legit.
No. Definitely not. So, I mean, a few things, like my best friend reminded me of this the other day, was that I really resourced myself. And I think that's huge when you become a widow or when you have some kind of tragedy like this, whether it be, an illness that you have or the loss of even a job or whatever, like resourcing yourself while you're going through this hard time is so key. I made sure that, I allowed people in, right? Like that I definitely had a lot of people show up for me, but I allowed them to show up for me. And I let them do things like get me a dozen eggs. I had a friend who paid for a chef to come in and cook food for myself and my son. My 18-year-old left for college 2 weeks after Jason died. And someone came in and cooked for Colton and me. And that was incredible because Jason was our chef. And so I was able to work with this person and have food made. And then a couple of weeks later, I was like, I'm not eating again. I'm not feeding my son again. And so what can I do? I don't want to cook. That stresses me out. So what did I do? I hired the chef to come back in and create some food that was food we would love, not just what would be delivered to us by community. That didn't work for me as well.
Yeah, the tater tot casseroles.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe not
definitely.
so much. Yeah.
Not so much. So I resourced myself with a chef. I resourced myself with a therapist. I eventually hired you as a life coach and joined your group. I made sure that I had some spiritual support around me and that I gave myself space to also enjoy life, right? You talk about, what is it? The dual
process model.
The dual process model. Thank you. Spending some time on grief, but also spending some time in other spaces, like going to live music or spending time with friends, whatever, going for a swim, whatever that might be. And so I made sure that I was resourcing myself properly so that I could deal with it. And the interesting thing is that after I did that for myself, I had a couple people in my community who went through a hard time. And I immediately was like, oh my gosh, this is what we need to do for these people. Right. And pulled people together and identified who do we need? What do we need to do to help this person? Not just the food train, but can we help them check their emails? Can we take the dog to the vet? Can we walk the dog? Those kinds of things. So resourcing yourself in creative ways that we don't always think about. Oh, I also hired a personal assistant for a little while because, it was amazing. And she became one of my best friends. And we didn't have our affairs in order. There was a lot to deal with. I had a business to close. I had children to raise. I still had my career. It was COVID. There was so much to deal with. I had 2 properties to manage, and they were large properties. And so I hired a friend of a group of my friends, and she came and sat in the dining room while I sat in Jason's office, and we worked side by side on managing my life. And it was incredible. It was so resourcing yourself, I guess is my big answer.
Was any of that hard for you to do? Because you said, I resource myself and I let myself have it. Did you have to have conversations with yourself about letting yourself have those resources?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have a lot of issues around money, like fear. I have some beliefs, some old beliefs from childhood that still, show up in my brain. And so, and I heard Jason a lot, telling me, don't spend money. We got to save. We're saving for retirement, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so to put the money out there to spend on any of this stuff was totally against my grain.
How did you wrestle with that and ultimately let yourself have it? Because I know you're not alone in that.
Yeah. I mean, some of it was coaching and some of it was my own self-coaching. And reminding myself that like, whoa, this is not a normal time.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that I can be my best, especially for my kids, is to not completely fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was already falling apart, right? I mean, I was going through all the hard emotions and the devastation. But I just kept reminding myself and talking to myself about the fact that this was okay for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can be proud of myself. Like I can put those other voices aside. And I don't know. I just gave myself the permission.
I wish more of us did that.
I do too. I mean, I think I gave myself one of the greatest gifts.
Yeah, for sure.
By giving myself that permission.
I also believe or have witnessed that I know that you were able to receive, but I also watched you draw some protective boundaries, right? Like decide what was healthy for you and what wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so not that you have to talk about that in great detail or anything, but I see the benefit of how you did both of those things, right? Because in some ways it can be hard to receive, but in other ways it can be hard to, make sure that what we are receiving is healthy, because, there are people who want to give us things that maybe aren't what we need, and figuring that out can be hard.
Yes, I had a lot of that, and with some of my closest people in my life. Mm-hmm. That wanted to, and I don't know if this is what you were thinking about, but I had people in my life who are some of my closest people who they were probably just about as devastated as I was at Jason's passing. And they wanted so badly, they needed to help and support and love and myself and my kids. And they showed up in ways that worked. And then they also showed up in ways that were really hard for me and for my kids. And I had to address that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that was really hard for me because I know it was all coming from such a place of love. Mm-hmm. And as much as I wanted to let people into love, I had to go with my gut. There were things that if I allowed my inner critic, if I allowed my mother's voice, if I allowed society's voice, if I allowed all these voices to come in, I would never have gone with my gut and what my truth was. And like I said, it was COVID. My son had moved into our barn during COVID before Jason died, 15 years old, and he had moved into our barn. He wanted space. And we were like, cool, have fun. And the barn was finished upstairs. So it wasn't like he was sleeping in hay.
He's not sleeping in the hay, right?
No, although that would have been fine too. But he was living in the barn and, there's a bathroom up there. There's a TV. He's got everything he needs. And, he came home all the time, to watch TV with us or have dinner or, connect or whatever. But after Jason died, he stayed in the barn. And Emmy left for Hawaii. He stayed in the barn and I was in the house all by myself. And people were worried. They were worried about me being home alone. They were worried about him being in the barn. And I had all these voices coming at me, even ones that weren't really coming at me, but they were just in my brain. And I had to stay true to myself and trust myself. I asked him if he wanted to come back in the house. He didn't want to, I had to trust that he was right where he needed to be. And he was on his journey. And I'm so glad that I did not force him, because what I've learned about him over the last 4 years is space is the greatest thing for him.
Yeah.
And
everyone's so different.
Listen to myself. Everyone's so different. And he was with Jason when he died. So how in the world could I possibly have any idea what he really needs?
Yeah.
And I had to trust him.
Yeah. And a lot of us, I think, come to this experience not having a strong history of trusting ourselves.
Yeah, totally.
It's really hard when you need it most and you don't have that muscle practiced to be able to do that.
Yeah. And I didn't always trust myself. As you know, you spent many days coaching me through tears of not trusting myself. But that's the work. That's the mind work, the brain work, the thought work is what we have to keep doing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
I do it every day. I did it this morning, preparing to talk to you.
Oh, I love it. I love it. When you think back and listen to those people listening, I provide this list of questions that I'm probably going to ask, and then I don't ask anything on that list. So I just throw things at people. So here we go. But I'm curious, when you look back, what were some of the things that you thought would be harder or more difficult that didn't turn out to be? And what were some things that you wouldn't have anticipated would have been hard or difficult that really surprised you and were difficult?
Yeah, I was surprised at how hard the holidays were going to become. I'm going to talk about holidays because they're really on my mind. We're coming into the holidays. And I know everyone talks about holidays being hard. I guess I knew the holidays would be hard. I didn't know the holidays were going to change so much. So, like, everything changed. My mother-in-law basically, stopped being with us on the holidays. Jason's best friend stopped being with us on the holidays. The kid's uncle stopped being with us on the holidays. So like, I expected the holidays to be hard. I didn't know everyone was going to I'm going to put the language in there, abandon us in the process. And so that was confusing. Like that was really hard for me to navigate emotionally. So I knew holidays would be hard. I didn't know they would be so complicated. And then, something we haven't touched on, I don't think, is that I'm remarried now. And now I have 2 stepdaughters. And I didn't realize until I was in it how complicated that is to organize. Because, they have a mom who's wonderful, but like they want to be with so I'm trying to navigate, like, how do I bring a family together when they're all 4 adults, young adults, all the same age, and scattered across the country and have different needs and dynamics. And so that's something that has been surprisingly really difficult for me.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
And then I think another thing that comes to mind for me is, I've moved since Jason passed away, and I'm living in a new community and a whole new world, and I have new people in my life. And there was a part of me that was like, oh, I'm going to meet new people and start this new life. And I knew in my head that, like, your grief is everywhere. I wasn't moving to run away. I was moving forward and moving towards something. But I didn't realize, number one, how much, like, he's still so present in everything I do, everything, all day, right? And so that's good. I'm good with that because I want him to be, My husband says it's you, me, and Jason. And it is. It's like, a trio. Not always, but, and then, but even meeting people, right? I have this whole new community of people in my life, and my need for them to know my story and to know him and to know that that's a part of who I am. And so I'm not sure if that's hard necessarily as much as like, it's just been a surprise.
Well, from where I sit, it's a super authentic example of how it can be. Like, I don't always have, I feel like, a huge window into what happens when I'm not there, in like other people's personal life, but you are so open. And what I have seen from where I sit is that you really a lot of people apologize for their grief, and stop talking about their person or can't figure out how to navigate the memories into the new life. And that is definitely not what I have seen you do.
Yeah, I think I've gone the opposite direction for sure. And it feels really good and healthy for me. Like I feel like I'm the keeper of Jason and his memory, and like, I feel a responsibility to him, but only because it's what I want to do. Like it feels real for me. I talk to his friends all the time. I'm now in their group text to be like his high school buddies. They put me in when Jason passed away.
Oh.
So that, it's like a daily group text thing, right?
Oh.
And it just feels like so, like I'm honored to be able to continue to carry that light for him, but for us.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that their late husband's friends put them in the group text. Like, I think that's a new one for me. And I love it.
I love it. Yeah.
I got an email from somebody the other day, and she was like, I don't think I'm ready for coaching because I'm not ready to date again. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I need to be a little more specific, because I've noticed, sometimes when I invite former clients like you to come on the podcast, you might be in a relationship, right? But never my goal, never the idea that you have to be in a relationship to be happy again. Of course not. So knowing that, how did you decide? Like, what was your decision process like before you decided, okay, I do want to date again? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So first of all, it was my daughter's decision initially. My 18-year-old was on Bumble.
Oh, I'll create the profile for you, Mom. Don't you worry.
And I said, oh, that's funny. I got on Bumble recently. And she was like, you did? And so we were just talking about it. And she's like, let's check out the talent. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really ready to, date. And she's like, well, let's just look at what the talent looks like at 50.
The talent.
And so she played on my thing and fixed my profile. And so I was like, what? It's not a big deal. I could maybe go on a date. I had the desire to go on a date just to try it. So I'm not sure there was a whole lot of thought going into this.
Yeah.
This is just my story. And they were awful. They were fine. The guys were fine. But I was like, oh, these are not the people for me. And I was not ready. Okay. So, I had listened to your podcast on dating, the how to know when you're ready,
how to know when you're ready. Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew I wasn't ready. And then there was something in one of your coaching calls. I can't remember what it was, but there was something that came up. And what I was struck with was, oh, I need to think about, what do I want in a future partner down the road, if I ever have a future partner. I wasn't really planning on dating. I definitely wasn't planning on getting married again. I was working on figuring out how to love life. And I was loving life, even though I was in the midst of such tragic grief, right? I mean, I was doing amazing things with amazing people and living life to the fullest at the same time that I was sometimes on the floor, curled up in a ball and feeling completely broken. So I was doing both. And I decided to sit down and think about Jason really critically. What did I love about him? What would I want in a future person? And what would I want to leave behind? So, what were some things about him or our relationship or how we were together that I'd want to leave behind? And that was a really good exercise. And then I took it a step further. I dove into my own languages of love and the things that were important to me that had nothing to do with Jason. And I literally defined this human that I would want to meet at some point in my life. But there was so much about it that was about me loving my life. And me being in my power and me finding my inner queen. People were calling me a queen at the time, which was so corny, but it was something I needed to really tap into, right? That inner badass.
Yeah.
And so this person needed to be able to come into that and be able to honor that and add to that, not ever diminish it. So I guess that was my process. And then oddly enough, very soon after that, Dom fell into my life, literally, I think Jason and Bobby went oh, that's what she wants? Okay, here he is.
Oh.
And dropped him. And I guess the thing I would want to tell the women out there is that I mean, I fell in love really hard, really fast. It was incredible. And it was incredibly hard.
Mm.
It was early. I met him a year after Jason died. And
I mean, and I think early is a highly relative term.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Let's take that out of there. It doesn't matter.
Oh, no. Like if it felt early for you, but
it felt early to me.
Yeah. Some people will be like, it's only been 5 years. And some other people will be like, who knows? Yeah.
Oh, and of course I had so many people like right after Jason died said, oh, you're young, you'll meet someone. And I was like,
F you.
Screw that. Yeah. I almost put my fingers up because double fingers. I was like, are you kidding? And a lot of his friends, like his closest friends, said things like that to me. And I think it was just them wanting to feel like I was going to be okay.
Sure.
But I guess what they don't realize is that women can be okay without a man.
Thank you.
Or without a partner, I should say.
Yeah.
That we can be okay without a partner and we can have our own backs. But it was really hard because even though I was in this incredibly amazing experience with this person and falling head over heels, I was managing so many difficult thoughts about guilt, not guilt towards Jason. I never had guilt towards Jason, even though we never talked about giving each other permission, which I think everybody should or could. But it was more around guilt towards my kids, guilt towards, a couple of people, only 2 or 3 people were upset that I was dating beyond my kids. But I had so much guilt around. I decided to sell my house a year earlier than Jason and I were planning. I decided to quit my job, all these things that really didn't have to do with Dom, but they got amplified because I was in this relationship. And then fast forward a year later or 2 years later, I guess, I've moved with him. I've married him. And now all these grief things are popping up that maybe I had delayed a little bit. I had done all this work on myself, but then it was almost like I put a little pause in there. I was so focused on all my change and adventure and moving forward and all of that, that I then found myself needing to get back into the work. I pulled out all the books for a second, third time, use the self-coaching tools over and over and over again. The first year of relationships is often so blissful.
Yes. Yeah.
And then the truth about us starts to come out. But again, I just had to keep trusting myself through that process. So I don't know. I guess my point is it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, even when it's good. I mean, I've grown so much in this relationship and I've had so much personal growth over the last few years that it's been incredible, but it's also been hard.
Yeah. Yeah. How did Jason's death affect what you saw as your purpose in life and maybe also identity? Because so many of us struggle there.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've always been pretty independent. In fact, when I reflect on our wedding vows, when we got married 27 years ago or whatever it was, even those vows, I intentionally included language around being my own self and honoring that. And so that's just kind of a little bit of who I am. And, I did have a career. I did have a life outside of the home. I think what I didn't realize is how much of my identity it was, maybe not identity, life experience. I really struggled with confidence after he died. And I didn't realize that I was maybe taking my confidence, and maybe it wasn't confidence, maybe it was more of a feeling of safety and security, that I could trust him, that I could fall back on him, that he would catch me if I fell. So I don't know if that's an identity thing. Maybe it is, but I still struggle with that. Even now, when I have a decision to make, a big decision to make, I still find that creeps in like, oh God, if Jason was here, I could talk to him about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
So that I've had to really like work on rebuilding is
Mm-hmm.
that confidence factor. And it has sometimes eaten away at what I would call my life purpose, which is, I believe, what you
Mm-hmm.
started with. I've had such clarity about my life purpose since I was probably in like 5th grade. And it has manifested in different ways throughout my life journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I had such a clear vision of what I wanted it to look like in this time of my life.
Mm.
I have literally a physical view of what my life vision was for 55, and I'm about to turn 55 next year. And so much of it is like in place, but this one aspect, which is my career, is not. That is like the one piece is around my career. And so I'm still on that labyrinth of trying to figure out, is this a money belief issue that I have? Like one of those fear things that is coming in? Is it really about having a career, or is it more about how I show up in the world? Like, am I supposed to be leaning into my retirement? Like, this is where I am right now, is trying to figure this out. And I'm giving myself this grace every day of slowing down and walking through this labyrinth of like the unknown. Like, and I don't think that's necessarily about Jason, but he was there. We had a plan. Everything was planned out for our life. Everything. We were executing that retirement plan. And whoa, like what a shocker to be stopped in your tracks.
Yeah.
And to now not really know how to get there. And I've just learned to trust that I'm getting there wherever that is.
Yeah. I love that.
I don't know
because that is how it is, right? Even when we think we have a plan and we have a clear vision, that doesn't mean it's how it's going to go. And so I love what you said about slowly walking the labyrinth. Like that really is, that is how we stay present. That is how we stay open-hearted and yeah. And I think, it's hard for listeners who don't know you to appreciate the importance of what you said about your confidence and the impact of Jason's death on that. But the reason I think it's important is because I'm guessing anybody who knows you, would say, wow, like that's a confident person.
Yeah.
Very open-hearted. Right? Like very loving, very giving. So I don't mean like arrogant. I just mean like she's got it together. Like,
Yeah, everyone thinks that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of women identify that way too. And then when their grief experience has them feeling unconfident or less confident in such a way that is foreign, right? That just feels so unfamiliar. It can be so wild to feel like you really were in this confident place and then not. And then it's so easy to make that mean something about you, or make it mean that it's not going to come back, or that it's, and so it's just nice to be honest about that it is a really common experience. You did make decisions together, like
hugely common. I mean, I think I've told you before, I feel like a widow magnet now in my life. I collect widows. I like feel this connection. And so I think because I feel that connection, they just show up, right? It's that manifesting thing.
Yeah. And also I think it's because you're a very giving person. And so I just watched you in Mom Goes On for a long time, always cheerleading other people and encouraging them and reminding them of what's inside of them and what they're capable of. And so of course you do that in your real life, quote unquote. Yeah, that tracks. That's on brand for Amy. Yeah.
And it fills me up for other people to feel like seen and understood. And, that to me is incredible. Yeah. And
no surprise that you wanted to be a coach, like had those visions like beforehand, like no surprise at all.
Sure.
Okay. So I always hate that these are so much shorter than I want them to be. I feel like they should be longer, but anyway.
Anyway,
since I get it. Travel time. Like if you could go back and talk to Amy early on after Jason died or at any point in the journey, i.e., give other widows who have been where you are advice. Wish you had learned something, wish you had known something, something you know now. What would you want that version of Amy to know? What would you want other listeners to know?
That number one, you're going to be okay. Well, like, I really believe that. Like, I knew that, but I didn't really know it. I don't know how to explain that. It was scary. It was scary to witness myself go through grief, all of the emotions of grief, right? It was scary to witness it. And yet, like, I think grieving it wholly and allowing myself to dive into it and to address all of the different aspects of grief and all of the different aspects of my life, because it's not just about the loss of your partner, right? It's everything. It touches everything in your life. And so to be able to really get in touch with the feelings and what was going on in my brain was hugely important. I changed everything in my life. I broke all the rules, but that's what I do in life. I'm a rule breaker, always have been. And I broke all the rules, right? All the rules that you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to make big decisions your first year. Well, guess what? I broke them all, and I don't believe that rule, and I don't regret any of them. I think it would have benefited me to do some slowing down and some more breathing and stillness. And I had a pretty amazing spiritual practice that I focused on every morning. It was like regimented. Every morning I got up and dove into my spiritual practice. And it was one I designed for myself. I connected in my own way. But
pre-Jason's death or something you did after? Okay. Yeah.
After. And I still do it 4 years later. I still, and it's evolved, but it has, and it's become when I have a bad moment, when I have a difficult time, when I have a fight with my husband, when I'm having a grief grenade, whatever it is, I go to that place in my house. And it has been one of the greatest gifts to myself. So, resourcing, finding other widows.
Yeah.
I know I've said that I've been an attractor for new widows, but finding other widows, like, I haven't really tapped into my ancestral widows or my aunts who are still alive who are widows. I have tapped into them emotionally inside, but not spent a lot of time talking with them. I think that would have been really beneficial. But I have built so many of these relationships with these women who are in the same boat, especially through Mom Goes On, that has helped me to heal.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're not alone. And by the way, I remember when Jason first died, someone had a widow reach out to me and I was like, I want to be alone in this. I don't want to hear anyone else's story. That was my first initial response. And 2 months later, I met my first widow. Somebody asked me to talk to her because she became a widow 2 months after me. And it was the best thing I ever did was to say yes.
Wow.
And I still call her my widow wife. I called her last night. I was like, I need a lifeline. She answered. And I have all these women in my life who I can relate to and who I can lean on for support and love and find us. We are out there.
Yes.
That is,
I love it.
The most important.
So you're going to be okay.
You're going to be okay.
Feel your feelings, resource yourself, find your own spiritual practice.
Yes.
That works. Surround yourself in community with other widows when you can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, I think if anybody's ever worried, if you someday envision yourself being in a relationship and there is some part of you that is saying, well, I can't be in a romantic relationship anytime in the future and still, carry on a daily basis in a visible way the memory of my person.
Yeah.
You are a great example of that is some nonsense. It can be done in a healthy way.
Yeah. And that is a prerequisite of that next person.
That's what I think too. Like when people are so worried about it, I'm like, why are we even entertaining that we would be in relationship with people who don't honor that part of our life experience and our heart? Like it makes no sense to me. But also it does make sense to me because I understand how we're socialized.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You know? Yeah. I just don't,
of course,
I don't want it.
I understand.
I wish we would be like, no.
Yeah. That
deal breker.
That thought's not allowed. Yeah. That's a deal breaker. That's not allowed. So,
yeah. Anyway. Is there anything that you were hoping to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
I don't think so. No, I mean, I think the only thing that I want to stress for people is that, you know, it is in your power. It is in your control to do the work so that you can create a life you love. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. That doesn't mean you're not going to feel hard feelings. That's the human part of life. I mean, but you get to choose, how do you want to show up in this life for yourself? And it's hard work, but it's yours for the taking.
I love it.
So
I'm so glad I met you, Amy. I'm so glad. Thank you for coming and sharing your story. And
I'm so surprised I didn't cry.
We can go back and do it over. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I love it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, meeting you and being a part of Mom Goes On has been absolutely just the greatest, you know, thing for healing. And I just believe in it so much. I mean, you know, I share your stuff with people all the time, and I just believe in it. And I know this isn't an advertisement, but I'm saying it because I feel it so incredibly much. And, you know, I love you, and I love the women that are in our group. So thank you so much. 3.5 years of being in the program. And then, you know, even though I'm not in it on the monthly basis, I'm doing the happier holidays right now because I believe in setting myself up for success. And I still engage in the Slack, and I connect with the women, and it's just a really important part of my life. Once a widow, always a widow.
I love it. Well, I'm a little biased, but I wholeheartedly co-sign everything you just said. I think it's pretty amazing. And who would have ever thought, out of something so awful, which I know Jason's death for you was awful, Hugo's death for me was awful, and I'm not grateful for it, but also I am just so grateful that you and women like you are the people that I now know and get to work with, and that the ripple effect of what happens when we take good care of ourselves and figure out what to do in our grief, and like how that impacts the world. It's just like, it's always still surreal to me every time I really give it thought. So
it is incredible. There are so many odd gifts that come out of something we never would have wanted. And I just want to share, I was so nervous to do this morning, that lack of confidence thing, right? And the thought that came to me last night, where I needed the lifeline to my widow wife, was if Jason hadn't died, I wouldn't be going on this podcast. And I was able, thanks to you and your work, to turn that around and to come up with an intentional thought. And I actually did a mega model. I came up with a ton of intentional thoughts. Like, if Jason hadn't died, then this wouldn't have happened. And I came up with this list a mile long of all the gifts that I've gotten, and this being one of them. So yeah.
Well, now you're making me all teary. But I'm really glad to hear that. That is what it's all about. We always get to be the ones that choose, to your point.
Yeah.
Such a great example of you doing that in your own life. Yeah. Okay. Keep in touch, my friend.
All right. Love you.
On the career labyrinth. All right.
All right. Talk to you later.
Right, bye. If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and want to create a future you can truly get excited about, even after the loss of your spouse, I invite you to join my Mom Goes On coaching program. It's small group coaching just for widowed moms like you, where I'll help you figure out what's holding you back and give you the tools and support you need so you can move forward with confidence. Please don't settle for a new normal that's less than what you deserve. Go to coachingwithkrista.com and click Work With Me for details and next steps. I can't wait to meet you.